It's so disingenuous, isn't it? It's just astonishing. And I think you can really, really see the fingerprints of the climate deniers and the oil and gas interests that are funding the Reform Party. That's, let's be honest, that's what's going on here. It's clear as day. The rich are getting richer, the poor are getting poorer. And the solutions are things like introducing a wealth tax to properly fund public services and address the fact that billionaires are getting richer by millions of pounds every day while people in full-time jobs are having to access food banks.
When you first came to Parliament, what's one thing that you've learned that you just had no idea about? It's like something that's really cool or interesting that people might not know about?
To be honest, most of the things I've learnt about Parliament have not been the cool bits. They've been the frustrating, why the hell is it like this things. So the one that really shocked me and really annoys me is the way you make sure you get a seat in the chamber. So the Commons chamber only has room for about 450 MPs, even though there are 650 of us. And that's not just a matter of inconvenience and comfort. You see on busy days people standing in the aisles or perching on the steps. But what I didn't know until I got elected is, firstly, you're not allowed to speak in the chamber unless you're on the main benches. So it's a matter of democracy.
Oh yeah, I've never thought of that before, because now that you think about it, I've never seen somebody ask a question who's been stood or...
Exactly,
I never thought of
that. But the really pernicious thing is that the way that you guarantee yourself a seat is to turn up hours before the debate starts, which is an inefficient use of time, and lay a prayer card on the seat that you want to sit on. And it's basically like putting a towel on a sun lounger at 7 o'clock in the morning. That's basically the process. And then you can go away, do something else for an hour or two, and then you come back and you have to be in the room for the start of prayers, which happen before debate begins every day. Now, I acknowledge that, Church of England is our state religion. I can live with there being prayers at the beginning of the day, but the fact that you have to be there for prayers if you want a seat on a busy day and therefore the ability to speak and take part in democracy, that doesn't seem great, especially
with... a bit more
with
separation of church and state, do you think?
Exactly. Especially with an increasingly diverse House of Commons where there are lots of people of other faiths or no faith, that feels pretty exclusionary and I just don't know how that serves us.
Yeah. Well, if you're Suella Braverman, if you ever saw her when she was getting sworn into Parliament, she couldn't decide if she wanted to swear on different religious books. It was a whole thing that went very viral. I don't know if you saw
I missed that.
Okay, to get to the juice of it. So you guys got 4 seats. You've got over 800 councillors. You came second in so many more. You guys have used your platform since getting your amazing performance at the election. You've championed public ownership of water. You've been opposing actively the ongoing genocide in Gaza, if you've described it, and of course you've been highlighting the climate emergency. You were going very viral during the election period. The first thing when you search your name, I'm obsessed with TikTok. I spend way too much time on it. When you search your name, the first things that come up is multiple clips of you getting 80, 90,000 likes, hundreds of thousands of views, and you had so much success there. But so what's your party's plan now to really get the green voice out there, get you out there more, because you seem to be the star of the party. You are the face of the party. And what's the Green Party plan now over the next few years until the next election to really get out there?
Well, you're right. We had a fantastic general election, obviously quadrupling our representation in the Commons and hugely increasing our number of councillors over the last few years. But that is absolutely not the peak of our ambitions. Having come second in 40 constituencies, there is clearly an appetite out there to have Greens as a larger part of British politics, and I'm really keen that we make the most of that opportunity and make sure that more people have the opportunity of being represented by a Green. And also in this political environment with Reform gaining in the polls and the Conservatives and now Labour as well not really offering any serious challenge or alternative to reform, I think it increasingly falls on us as the Greens to do that. And so it's not only a political opportunity, I feel like it's a duty for us to to be the people speaking the truth, talking about what are the real causes of the problems that we're facing in this country, not letting Reform's narrative of scapegoating people who've got nothing to do with causing those problems. And so, yeah, I think there's going to be an increasing role for us as Greens, the existing MPs in Parliament and the next generation of Greens that we get elected at the next election.
So speaking of opportunities, Lewis Goodall recently interviewed Adrian Ramsey on the Newsagent podcast. He's one of the co-hosts, and he kept getting emails and messages saying, why are you not talking about the Greens more? Why have you got a bias against them? What is the media bias against the Greens? So he brought Adrian on a few weeks ago and talked to him about it. And Lewis posed a question about the idea of, as you've just said, Reform are taking all these opportunities, they're catching the headlines, and there seems to be people wanting an alternative, and many people obviously just want to vote anti-establishment. But he basically posed the idea that voters are leaving these traditional parties, but since the election, the polls for the Greens haven't moved that much. And are the Green Party really meeting this opportunity right now with so many people looking for an alternative?
Yeah, the whole political system and the media landscape in the UK can make it tricky for small parties to break through. And as the Greens, we are proud to be different and to not do politics as usual. So we're not going to get dragged into, we're obviously not going to get dragged into the outright racism and disinformation of Reform, but we're not about the sort of political machinations and the smearing of other people that some of the other parties do either. And so sometimes I have had journalists say to me, don't you need to learn from Reform and use their tactics? It's like, well, not if that means being racist on air. No, I'm not going to do that. But I do recognise that perhaps, just saying the media should give us more airtime isn't enough. We do need to make sure that we're being interesting and earning that airtime. So that's a fair point, and that's something I've been thinking about.
Speaking of creating opportunities, all of us here at Turn Left, we do a lot of social media-based content, and we wanted to look at what you guys are putting out. So we went onto Instagram. You've got 169,000 followers, and on TikTok, the Green Party has 69,000 followers. But we noticed that as of yesterday, there was only 8 or 9 posts this year. And, we've got...
on TikTok,
on TikTok,
because
yeah.
there's way more, there's probably hundreds on Instagram.
There's loads on Instagram, but they seem to be very photo-based. And what I'm trying to get at here is, on the TikTok page, I told you earlier that there was a video posted of yourself in Parliament yesterday. There was a video from a few weeks ago. I can't remember what the topic was. But out of all of those videos, the only ones that seemed to do really well was you on camera. And that seems to be what is inspiring people, what's getting attention. And, with so many people taking advantage of social media spaces through video format, it seems to me like the Greens are missing opportunities with only 9 posts since the beginning of this year on TikTok. We've got Ed Davey out there challenging, Keir Starmer to a football match. I'm not saying you have to do stuff like that.
Well, Adrian's the football player. He's on a five-a-side team, so if anyone, we're sending him for that.
You are, to me and many people, the face of the Green Party, and it seems like when you're on camera and you're the face of it, it does really well. But people that we've spoken to don't feel like they're still seeing enough of the Greens. The algorithms, the way that they work, you can't always, force the algorithm to get you seen. So the only way to do it is really flood it. And your face brings views, your voice brings views. So do you feel like you are potentially missing an opportunity to be in front of that camera more in social media?
Yeah, that's probably a fair point. And I have already been trying to make the time to do more sort of face-to-face video content over the last month or so since Christmas. It can be hard to just carve out enough time to do that during the parliamentary day. Parliament sits from early afternoon on Monday to mid-afternoon on Thursday, and with just 4 of us Green MPs trying to cover every portfolio in government in that time. And to be honest, we are prioritising doing our job as MPs, asking the government questions, putting pressure on them to be bolder and more progressive in Westminster. Whereas the likes of Nigel Farage and Ed Davey actually aren't in the Commons chamber very often, so they've got more time to do these selfie videos. So it's a bit of a how many hours are in the day situation, but I think it's a fair point, and I am trying to make more time to do that kind of thing.
Yeah, well, speaking of people not being actually in the Commons and obviously making hay on social media, we've got people like the Reform Party who are, weaponising certain issues, going into identity politics. And, just a few weeks ago when we were talking about the Southport attack, we have people like the Reform MP standing up in Parliament saying, and doing press conferences and doing social media posts saying, we need inquiries, we need to fight for women and children. And then if you actually look at their parliamentary record, I actually compared it to your parties. You guys are there twice as often as they are. There was only one MP who went to the debate against violence against women, but they're on social media creating this storm, and you guys are going to the debates but not getting the attention for it. So how do you actually balance that? Because if you can't actually take it to the voters who want to know what you're doing without getting that message across, how do they know? What other things can we be doing to like really, get more attention towards like left-leaning politics? Because they're dominating the space right now.
Yeah. In terms of reform hardly ever being in the room, I mean, it's a well-worn remark that does Nigel Farage even know where Clacton is?
They're only there for the hot topics.
But I'm not sure he even knows where, they're not even there for the hot topics. That's the maddening thing.
Some of the hot topics, yeah.
A few days ago, we had the debate on the Borders and Immigration Bill, and nobody from Reform was in the room for almost the entire of the debate. They popped in for a few minutes near the end. Surely that's their core issue if they're going to be in there for anything, but they weren't.
Would you ever consider, in America as well, things are definitely more heated, things are more partisan. We've got people like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who is, she's posting videos in between debates. When she's making a dinner at night, she's just like on Instagram Live, just taking questions. We've got Zara Sultana in the UK, who I think is not doing as much as AOC in the US, but she's really engaging with all these young people and just doing that really casual and fun content. And do you ever think there's an opportunity to really go after reform in that way? Would you ever not just pick up the camera and be like, oh, Nigel Farage has just been on GB News talking about we need to protect women and children, but last week there was a debate on women and children and not one single Reform MP was there. Is that the pathway that you would consider adding to your communication strategy?
Yeah, consider it.
Yeah, just as a small suggestion. We've got Reform doing big press conferences. Ed Davey did his press conference recently about the European Union. Are you guys planning to do more press conferences responding to things that when they happen and just really trying to capture the moment there as well? What's your plan around that?
Yeah, we've been developing our strategy for how we're going to work as a group of new Green MPs at the moment. So watch this space on that one. So
I'm sure you saw Owen Jones's article from a few weeks ago. The Green Party's time is now, but it needs to stop being polite and start picking some fights. He was basically proposing this idea of you need to get a bit dirty. I think that's the word that he used when he was speaking to the News Agent podcast. You need to get dirty. Now, as you said, you don't want to attack minorities because that would be ridiculous. That's scapegoating. But do you feel like you're ready for that fight? Are you ready to get really into the mess and just get a little bit dirty with the fighting, but as long as it remains obviously honest and from a good place?
Yeah, I think that is a fair comment, that we could perhaps pull ourselves out of the detail of policy proposals and talk in a bit more plain English and perhaps be a bit more spicy sometimes.
Talk to me about Parliament. What preconceptions did you have about how the system worked, and what have you found when you've gone into Parliament and seen how the system doesn't work or how it's broken and how it can be changed and fixed to be more effective?
I mean, I already knew that politics in this country was broken, and frankly, that's what led me to join the Green Party in the first place back in 2011, and to get involved in it, was that I saw that the existing establishment parties were not offering any meaningful change. I originally had really no faith in party politics as a way to achieve change overall, and it was only through meeting Green Party members through some campaigns I was involved in that I even considered joining the Greens. So, I already had my eyes wide open coming in here, that I knew there would be lots of stupid traditions that get in the way of democracy and that really favour the establishment parties and frankly, favour well-off, able-bodied people with plenty of money as well. The hours, for example, that Parliament sits is pretty incompatible with caring responsibilities or having a disability or anything like that. So there's lots of things that I would change about how it works, and I really see that part of my and the Green Party's role is to shake things up from the inside. I saw that in my 9 years as a councillor on Bristol City Council, and now I see that as part of our job here in Parliament too.
With the idea that people have this sentiment of politicians being elite and rich from certain schools, they're using their positions to fill their pockets, which in many cases has been proven to be true. MPs have had a new pay rise proposal of, I think it was £2,500. The government can reject it. What are your thoughts on that?
I want to pick up on the first thing you said first about this impression that politicians are all just there to fill their own pockets. There are certainly politicians for whom that is true, but the danger of tarring all politicians with that brush is that actually benefits the bad eggs. You know, if we all have this attitude of, oh, they're all as bad as each other, there's no difference between them, then people that want positive outcomes in the country are going to disengage from politics entirely, but the far right aren't going to, and so they'll be the ones that win.
What's interesting about that, though, is that I speak to a lot of reform voters, and I hear them say this, you know, politicians are out there to fill their own pockets. And then they don't realise that Nigel Farage is the...
More so than any other.
I think he's the highest earning MP of the last year in Parliament, which is incredible because there are people in Parliament, even from last year, who are worth tens and tens of millions of pounds. In terms of perception, do you think politicians should accept that pay rise right now?
Well, first of all, picking up on the first part of what you said, I really think it is dangerous to tar all politicians with the same brush and say that they're all in it for themselves and for money. No doubt about it, some politicians are. But if you lump all of us in together, then that actually benefits the ones that are all in it for themselves, I think, because then it means that good people switch off from politics and maybe don't vote, whereas you can be sure that the Conservatives and the far right still will. So, yeah, that's something that I felt passionate about since before I was a politician myself, that just saying, oh, they're all the same, just lets the bad guys win. And it's, you know, doubly so with reform. Like, we see how much money the likes of Farage makes on the side, and how much the Reform Party is funded by billionaires and oil and gas companies and climate deniers. So,
do you think they should be allowed to have TV shows?
No, I don't. And in fact, I and the other Greens have fed into a consultation about second jobs for MPs, and we made exactly that point. Like, it's one thing allowing an MP who's got a professional qualification like a GP to practice enough to keep that live, but I think it's another to have an entire whole second job alongside, and especially one where you've got a significant ability to control media output. And I think there needs to be much tighter rules on who you're funded by, and reporting that and making it clear how that's influencing your politics, because in theory that happens now with MPs. In practice, I think the likes of Reform are getting away with a lot. Back to your point about pay, I don't think MPs should, you know, you said that the government can challenge the recommendations if they want. I don't think MPs should set their own pay at all. I think it should be a completely independent system. When I was a local councillor in Bristol, we had to vote on our own pay as well. And that was really tricky, because while MPs are paid fairly well, local councillors are paid an absolute pittance. Most councillors, it varies on your council depending on how big the council is and how big an area you represent, but it's typically around 8, 10, 12k a year. So that's obviously nothing like enough to live on.
So yesterday, Reform held a press conference. The Reform UK would impose taxes on renewable energy sector under its plans to scrap the country's net zero target. This was from Richard Tice. He said he's basically going to tax all these companies, if they come into power, that have received subsidies, to get the money back. And he said that it's somehow going to get the money back and also make bills cheaper. What's your response to taxing, or he actually called it a wealth tax, putting a wealth tax on companies who've received subsidies for being green energy?
It's so disingenuous, isn't it? It's just astonishing. And I think you can really, really see the fingerprints of the climate deniers and the oil and gas interests that are funding the Reform Party. That's, let's be honest, that's what's going on here. It's clear as day. The idea that we should be taxing renewable energy companies more, no, because tax isn't just a way to raise funds. It's a way to send a signal to the market about what the government wants to see more or less of. So we should be taxing oil and gas companies more, and supporting the rollout of renewables. Now, a lot of renewables, especially onshore wind and solar, is very much commercially, commercial level now. It's already often the cheapest form of electricity, and so that doesn't need as much government support. But some of the other technologies, like floating offshore wind, for example, and not the generation, but the supporting technologies like like battery storage and improvements to the grid, that's the stuff that needs government investment in order to be able to scale up and reach net zero. But ultimately, reform are funded by climate deniers. I think probably a good chunk of them are climate deniers themselves. So of course they're going to argue against investment in renewable energy. My concern is that the Conservatives and increasingly the Labour government are not offering the alternative to reform. They seem to think that the way of dealing with the threat of reform, whether it's around attitudes to migration or to net zero, is to slide towards them rather than to properly counter the misinformation they're sharing.
To go back to the idea of like missed opportunities as well, and I promise you this is not a gotcha. I really want to get the Green voice out there a lot more. When we realised that this was happening, this press conference, we went on everyone's social media. We went on the Green Party social media, on Instagram, on TikTok. We even checked all the MPs' social media. Nobody responded to this, and nobody has responded to this like publicly in terms of social media comms since this was an announcement from the reforms. And it feels like it was, again, a perfect opportunity to really immediately get straight out there and be like, this is ridiculous. This shouldn't be happening. It's hypocrisy. Do you, again, feel like that's potentially like a missed opportunity where you can get straight out there and grab the attention?
Yeah, that's probably a fair point. And that particular example, I was in meetings until late last night, so I wasn't watching the news myself personally. But yeah, that's probably a fair point.
I want to quickly jump on to like Trump and Elon. You've been, very vocal about Trump. You referred to him as a fascist. You were talking about Elon a few weeks ago on Politics Joe as well. That was in and around the time of the salute gesture that he made. And, you said, you can't see it as anything else. Where are we going right now? Because we've got somebody like Elon Musk who is attacking governments all over the world, spreading disinformation everywhere. Just a few weeks ago, he was saying that our government is authoritarian and looking up this guy who went to prison for 7.5 years for doing a social media post, when in actual fact, he was arranging attacks on mosques during the Southport riot on Telegram. How do we combat this when you've got a guy almost with $500 billion using his platform combined with the power of the American presidency now, just absolutely attacking democracy all over the world with lies, disinformation, and seemingly getting away with it?
Yeah, I completely agree with you. The disinformation is really getting out of hand, and I do think that there's more that the government could be doing on that and on the influence of the likes of Musk on British politics. So this rumour seems to have disappeared, at least for now, but obviously there was that talk a month or two ago about Musk making a huge donation.
Well, they had a little public fallout on social media, didn't they? So we'll see what happens with that.
Yeah, but that kind of briefly caused some discussion about maybe we should reform the way political donations are regulated in this country, and I couldn't agree more. That's been in Green Party policy for God knows how long.
I do want to push those slightly. What can we do about this disinformation age? Because we've got young people coming out of the pipeline out of school who seem to be going more towards reform. That's what the trends show. We've got people living outside of traditional media systems, which fail in many ways anyway, and they're living in these ecosystems of news which are telling them that all the crime in the UK is committed by immigrants, and we've got disinformation about identity politics, and we've got that ITV documentary that's about to come out about these fascists who have been organising secretly in the UK. How do we actually fight this? What can we do to reach these people? I
don't think there's a silver bullet. If there was, we'd have fixed it already. I think that there's a role for better regulation of social media, definitely, in terms of active, deliberate disinformation, but also the use of algorithms to funnel people down more and more extreme routes of more and more extreme content. So yeah, I think that kind of regulating what happens on social media, and of course, let's not forget that Musk isn't just a user of social media, he's an owner of it. So the ownership models for social media as well. And this is harking back a few years now, but I remember there was a movement saying that Twitter was effectively a commons, so perhaps it should be owned cooperatively.
Musk calls it a public square.
Well, yeah, it was a privately run
public square where Nazi content is now completely mainstream.
Yeah, so I think there's a lot that we could do about at least regulating and ideally democratising some of our public spaces like that. But I think you're not going to fix it with regulation alone. I think it also has to be to do with recognising why are people getting sucked in by misinformation, disinformation from the likes of Reform. I think that often it is because people are feeling desperate. They're feeling let down by successive governments who prioritise things like chasing GDP growth rather than actively making people's lives better. They, from where they're sitting, things have got markedly worse in this country over the last 15 years. Access to public services, getting a doctor's appointment, the state of their town centre, of their schools and so on. So of course they're going to be angry with the mainstream political parties. Of course they're going to be looking around for an alternative. And the angrier and the more despondent and despairing they are about the state of politics, the more likely they are to be susceptible to the snake oil salesmen of Reform, who are rightly identifying people's frustration, but are then misleading them about what the cause of that is. And so I think it falls to us, to the left and to the Greens, to speak to people who are feeling frustrated with the political status quo in this country and accurately describe what the causes of those are. So really explicitly talk about the fact that we have vastly widening inequality in this country. The rich are getting richer, the poor are getting poorer, and the solutions are things like introducing a wealth tax to properly fund public services and address the fact that billionaires are getting richer by millions of pounds every day while people in full-time jobs are having to access food banks, and that those are some of the causes and solutions that are making causes and symptoms that are making things worse, rather than people coming here fleeing for their lives.
You have been one of the biggest voices, for me at least anyway, on this issue. You've been consistent throughout. You've called it a genocide. You have called on the government to restrict arms. We had a court case recently which proved that the government actually allowed 5 licenses to go through, which they thought was actually potentially in breach of humanitarian laws. And they allowed that to happen, and that was apparently due to pressure from the US. We have David Lammy in Parliament saying, oh, we can't use the word genocide for this, because essentially what he said is, like, not enough people have died, despite the fact in the Bosnian genocide, the victims were in and around a number of 8,000, which now we're in and around 50,000 with Gaza. We've got a Prime Minister who is a former human rights lawyer, and David Lammy, not knowing his history on genocide. Is the UK government currently complicit in genocide?
I've been incredibly frustrated with this government's response to what's going on in Gaza. They've been incredibly slow to act. They've been dragged kicking and screaming by voters, by their members, eventually calling for a ceasefire, eventually suspending some arms sales, but not all of them. The whole way through this, the Green Party have been, we've been calling for a ceasefire since October 2023. We've been calling for a full suspension of arms sales to Israel since not long after that. And since I've been elected as an MP, I've been really keeping up the pressure as much as I can, writing to David Lammy about arms sales, writing to him again more recently about the...
Did you get a response?
I can't remember. I either got no response or a sort of no real answer response. I can't remember which. And then I wrote recently to David Lammy again about President Trump's frankly alarming comments that amounted to advocating for ethnic cleansing.
Yeah, I saw you also posted on social media about that as well. Yeah. It got some good traction.
I argued that Lammy should summon the US ambassador to make very clear that the UK condemns and cannot support President Trump on anything approaching what he was proposing. Now, not surprisingly, Lammy declined to do that. He did, to be fair, state that the UK is very clear that we must have a two-state solution and that Palestinians must be allowed to live on their land. But he stopped well short of condemning anything President Trump has said. And I think that is disappointing and not in line with the values of the majority of people in this country.
Is calling for a two-state solution even enough? Because we've got Benjamin Netanyahu, we've got his party, we've got the far right in his party as well, Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, literally advocating for the ethnic cleansing, the genocide. Even if a two-state solution was made, how can we even trust Israel not to encroach on that anyway? It just feels like two-state solution, that's it, box checked, we don't have to say anything else, we've washed our hands with it. Is it enough?
Yeah, I agree. It feels like Labour's approach for a long time has just been, we believe in a two-state solution, go away, in response to calls for them to, for example, suspend all arms sales to Israel or to take a more active role in pushing for a lasting peace, not to mention the end of the illegal occupation of Palestinian territory. So
Which is still illegal under UK law.
Exactly. Yeah. So those are all the kinds of things that I and the Greens have been pushing Labour on, using every lever we can find.
Well, thank you so much, Carla, for joining us. I hope we can get you on again. Thank you for answering any questions. Is there any message you would like to give to anybody watching about the Green Party?
If you're feeling despairing about the rise of the far right, and frankly, I think anyone who's paying attention is, and you're wondering what you can do, I know, of course, I would say this, but consider joining the Greens. We are clearly the alternative to reform, and we're a really grassroots-led movement. So if you want to get involved, join up. You can get involved in community organising right from the off, like I did. I had a role in my local party within weeks of joining. So yeah, get involved and we can help build the alternative.
Right, I will let you get off. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Independent media is such an important part of the media landscape. So wherever you get your news from, go independent if you can, to broaden your media appetite and get the real story.